Well, hello. What are you doing down there? Oh, shit!
Written and directed by Steven Konstanski, of course known for directing Psycho Gorman among others, brings us Deathstalker. This one is produced by Slash from Guns N' Roses and stars Daniel Bernhardt. And this is a remake of the Roger Corman produced fantasy movie Deathstalker from the early to mid 80s, 1983 I believe. So I've actually been waiting for this one for quite a while now, since I heard it was being made. And so far in 2025, there's been a few movies that I've been looking forward to. Good Boy, Commando Ninja 2, the latest Hell House, all of which have been somewhat disappointing in one way or another. So Deathstalker Remake was kind of my final film that I've been really looking forward to this year. And let's talk about if that one failed to live up to my expectations. But let me tell you the story first of all. So Deathstalker is a kind of amoral, kind of roguish barbarian who serves no one. You know, we learn a little bit about his history in this movie and what has brought him to this place. But he's, you know, he exists in this kind of fantasy landscape. And there is this kind of evil force called the Dreadites, which are kind of undead warriors, and they're kind of sweeping the landscape, etc. And he comes across this talisman which binds him to this kind of quest to ultimately then try and defeat this kind of evil force. Along the way he picks up a couple of allies. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So yes, this is a kind of a quasi remake. It's really not much of a retelling of the original Deathstalker story really, and arguably speaking is kind of just another Deathstalker tale, you might say, rather than an actual remake of the original movie. In actual fact, I would say the actual kind of tone of the movie is more in line with the second movie, which is kind of viewed by most to be the better one out of the kind of the four original movies. So it's a kind of a fantasy movie, comedic, pretty gory. Let's talk about what works. Now, this one did not disappoint me. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. We have to bear in mind this is a remake of a schlocky B-movie to start with. So what is this film trying to do? It's trying to recreate a sword and sorcery movie, not really one of the mainstreams. This isn't the Conan or Krull or Beastmaster. This was a Roger Corman produced original movie, which was really a kind of a kind of response to Conan the Barbarian and such. So it's not trying to be a serious highbrow movie. We have to think of what the movie it's trying to be, and I think it succeeds. It's incredibly gory, but in that kind of cartoonish way. If you've ever seen movies like Psycho Gorman, you'll kind of know rubbery costumes, over the top, cartoonish looking gore. So not one that I think is going to make people be turned off by the levels of gore and stuff, because it's all very much like a kind of an adult cartoon, an adult comic book to a degree. But it's very, very creative and knowingly schlocky. This movie is trying to be a somewhat of a kind of a goofy movie where it's just serious enough where you can kind of go along for the ride and get involved in the characters. It's not trying to be a spoof, but it is not, its tongue is in its cheek, basically. Like, Daniel Bernhardt, an American actor, he's not worried about playing it in a kind of a European or English accent or anything like that. There's modern sort of language and stuff. It's kind of like the original Deathstalker, with the exception of maybe the kind of the nudity that those original movies had. But outside of that kind of like that over-the-top violence, lots of kind of monsters. And lots of practical effects. Our writer-director, of course, comes from a VFX background, and as such, we expect lots of kind of creative effects. There's a lot of references here, both from fantasy films like The Sword and the Sorcerer, and even things like Big Trouble in Little China. So there's plenty of kind of little kind of like recreations of scenes or props or things like that that you'll see from other movies, and kind of it does kind of pay homage to the original Deathstalker. We of course get a Pigman, which was kind of probably the more iconic kind of bad guy from the original movie. We get a few other kind of nods, and like the name of the inn, for example, is named after the original bad guy of the first movie. But it's wonderfully over the top, silly, goofy, but incredibly fun. I think Daniel Bernhardt actually gives probably more humanity as this Deathstalker, as he kind of gives it this more of an everyman feel in a way. Even though he's this like mythical warrior, the way he's kind of reacts to stuff and is just a little bit more kind of like relatable to a degree. So, I really actually quite enjoyed this portrayal of Deathstalker, who really, to be honest with you, in the original 4 movies, as much as I sort of enjoyed them to a degree, you never thought Deathstalker was a particularly interesting character, really. More, he's just a kind of an avatar for the different takes that have been sort of gone on by Rick Hill and other people who have played him. But here I felt you got a bit more of personality from the Deathstalker character. I liked his camaraderie with his kind of colleagues. That was kind of fun, and it almost has, you've got a barbarian, a thief, a wizard, so that has that sort of Dungeons and Dragon vibe. It is way over the top. There's loads of kind of different monsters. As I said, the aforementioned Pigman. We've got swamp monsters. We've got various kind of different demonic knight type characters and 2-headed creatures. So there's loads of kind of things kind of going on here. It's certainly lots of creative stuff, and as I've mentioned, it's quite gory. And the gore it's nearly all done sort of practically. Lots of kind of like rubber pieces of bodies that are going flying around. It's got quite a big cast. All who have seen, who are having fun with this kind of project. The story is kind of simple, but I think it kind of works in for this movie because it is not trying to be high art necessarily. It's trying to tell a somewhat simple kind of fantasy story, again like the original kind of Deathstalker movies. Without trying to subvert necessarily expectations and trying to do something kind of post-modern. I mean, there is a degree of modernness to it, because obviously it's a modern film, but I do think it ultimately does capture those kind of sorcery movies from the kind of the 80s with its kind of like gun-ho attitude and wanton violence and stuff like that, and an element of fun. Like I said, I think, and I think that the fact that the movie doesn't take itself too seriously, it ends up being a kind of a movie where you can kind of buy into the premise because it's not like Game of Thrones where it's trying to sort of like have this serious sort of fantasy drama type thing. It's a schlocky B movie and you buy into that, but it takes itself seriously enough while you still are going on for the kind of the swashbuckling ride. Any critiques of this one? I mean, arguably, if you're not interested in like movies like the Deathstalker series, I don't think this is going to convert you. That yes, you could arguably say the kind of the VFX, they kind of do look rubbery. I mean, that's kind of part of the charm. I'll admit, maybe I'm a little biased towards this because I kind of love these type of movies. But I would say, yes, if you haven't seen much of the films like these, you would say these effects look just rubbery and kind of silly. And that is fair, I suppose, if you're looking at it from a kind of a general audience kind of type of view. And I think the one thing that is missing, as I say, is that kind of sexual component that had the original Deathstalker be this kind of somewhat more of a ladies' man. That's, I guess, 2025, we still can't do that. We can't have more TNA movies like you did in the 80s, I suppose. But it's all there in the violence at the very kind of least. you know, it sort of does have a somewhat of an artificial feel. Again, this is not this is a remake of a B movie, so you know. But yes, if you want to be picky, there is a degree of kind of like fake veneer to this movie that I think may again put sort of some people off, and some of the kind of like the effects, our little wizard character, which is voiced by Patton Oswalt. It looks like Gwildor from the Master of the Universe, live action film, things like that. So there's a few things here that kind of do look a little bit kind of on the cheaper side and a bit rubbery and things like that. And arguably you could, again, there's flips on the coin. You could say, yeah, there's not really much in the way of story elements here. It's a simple story. I personally feel that works for this movie because it suits the sort of style of film that it's being, but you could say it's not a particularly deep movie in any way. So, it's going to be a question of taste to a large degree. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope they make more of these. I hope this is a new Deathstalker series. I would recommend it to people who watch this channel because this is the sort of films that, we have on this channel. So I would probably say check it out if you can. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. It's certainly not a perfect movie. It is low budget, but it's part of its charm. 7 out of 10. Have you seen it, or have you seen any of the original Deathstalker movies? Let us know and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.